So first we're going to go over the topic. Resolved. Justice requires open borders for human migration. This is the January-February topic for LD. We're going to go over some definitions. The most important words that I see are justice. So I have two different definitions for you. One of them's from Stanford University, and it's justice is the opposite of arbitrariness. It requires that where two cases are relevantly alike, they should be treated in the same way. And then the second one is the quality of being just, righteousness, equitableness, or moral righteousness, and that's from Collins Dictionary. You can use whatever definition that you want. Those are just two that I found. A lot of times justice can be referred to as giving each their due, but I couldn't really find a specific place where that was read, but you can kind of define it as that. So let's talk about what open borders are. So in the strictest sense, the term open borders implies that people may travel to and from a country without presenting a passport, visa, or other form of legal documentation. It does not, however, imply that new immigrants will automatically be granted citizenship. So that's important because it's not like you can just go to a new country or advocating for somebody being able to immigrate and just be automatically able to get the same rights as citizens. But it does just allow them to move there. This is seen in Europe. When traveling throughout Europe, once your passport's checked, you are able to travel between countries without issue. So Europe is an open border region where once you're within their borders, they allow you to travel between countries for easily. This is a definition that can be easily applied to the resolution, or you can try to qualify the openness, which is using a conditional open border program. So conditionally open borders allow people who meet legally established set of conditions to freely enter the country. These conditions represent exemptions to existing border control laws that would otherwise apply. For example, the United States Refugee Act grants the President of the United States the authority to permit a limited number of foreign nationals to enter and remain in the U.S. if they can prove a credible and reasonable fear of racial or political persecution in their home nations. Internationally, the United States, along with 148 other nations, have agreed to adhere to the 1951 Refugee Convention and its 1967 protocols, which allow people to cross through the borders and escape life-threatening situations in their homelands. So a conditionally open border would allow for, it's kind of like an exception type thing, which you theoretically could advocate in this, where it just says open borders. You could qualify it if you desired for the debate. So what is a controlled border? Countries with controlled borders place restrictions, sometimes significant, on immigration. So like the United States and the majority of the developed nations have controlled borders. Controlled borders typically require persons crossing them to present a visa or may allow for short-term visa-free visits. Controlled borders may impose internal checks to ensure that people who have entered the country are complying with their conditions of entry and have not overstayed their visa, continuing to reside in the country illegally as undocumented immigrants. In addition, physical passage across controlled borders is usually restricted to a limited number of points of entry, such as bridges and airports, where conditions for entry can be enforced. So that's like the United States. You could also talk about Hawaii had closed borders for a while because of COVID-19, and they required everyone who entered Hawaii, which is obviously via airplane, to quarantine in the facility. And if you had a place, like if you owned a house in Hawaii during COVID, you could go there, but you had to stay on that premises the entire time and they checked on you. So that would be another example of like a controlled border, whereas like the rest of the United States, you could just travel freely because they don't really have the ability to control the borders. So like I talked about, Europe has both controlled and open borders depending on where you originate from. So if you're within Europe, it's an open border system. If you're outside of Europe, you do have to go through customs, which is the controlled border portion. Usually they're controlled by physical barriers, like I was talking about with Hawaii. It's an island, so all ocean. You can't just pop up there easily. And just have designated entry points like the airport in Hawaii. You could also think about like the border wall that they wanted to put on the southern border. And part of the reason for that is there wasn't physical barriers keeping people from walking just across the border. So what is migration or human migration? So there's two different definitions here. One's from the Cambridge University, which says the process of a person or people traveling to a new place or country, usually in order to find work and live there temporarily or permanently. Okay, so because that says usually, it doesn't mean always, which means that can just apply to people traveling. So human migration by people traveling to and from. But the second definition, which is from Britannica, the permanent change of residence by an individual or a group. So you can see where these two definitions are kind of different in the way that they can be interpreted. And that can really change the debate and how you are really framing the conversation. Because if somebody's talking about limiting travel or making it harder to travel, you can see where that would cause different arguments than if somebody's saying that people should have to go through a process in order to migrate or change their permanent residency. Okay, so when I first looked at this topic, and I know a lot of people did, you think about the politics and what a hot button topic immigration is. So how can we talk about it without getting political? So while the resolution is a hot button political topic in America, the resolution does not limit the debate solely to America. So you should use general argumentation for worldwide as well as evidence and examples. Think about empirical examples that are around the world. As I've already discussed, Europe is a fantastic example for a place that permits open migration. And you can focus on why open migration can and cannot work, or why open migration is just or unjust. So you can really look at like the justice factor and why people want to migrate or not, instead of really talking about politics. I would also recommend not using politically charged evidence. So you want to really look at your sources and not just look at something that says all immigrants are murderers or something like that. Okay, open migration pros. So I also structured these in the way that kind of you should structure your contentions, where you have a tagline that is an argument. So the two taglines on this page are controlling borders is expensive, and then human migration boosts the economy. So those are taglines. That's my claim. So if I was writing a contention with both of these in my case, I would say contention 1, controlling borders is expensive. And then I would read it from there. Or contention 2, human migration boosts the economy. Because you want your contentions to have claims, have arguments. That's where you're telling your judge and your opponent what your argument is. So then you go on to the analysis and the evidence. So for this, I have controlling borders creates a financial drain on governments. For example, the United States budgeted $1.6 billion for a new border along the Gulf of Mexico and $210.5 million to hire Border Patrol agents in 2019 alone. In addition, during 2018, the U.S. government spent $3 billion to $8.43 million per day to detain undocumented immigrants. Okay. Obviously, with your contention, you'd have some analysis in there, but just for this, I'm just giving you some evidence. And then human migration boosts the economy. Throughout history, immigration has helped fuel the economies of many nations. In a phenomenon dubbed the immigration surplus, immigrants in the workforce increase a nation's human level of capital, inevitably increasing the production and raising its annual gross domestic product. For example, immigrants increase the GDP of the United States by an estimated 36 to 72 billion per year. Continuing on, we have cultural diversity is good for society. Societies have consistently benefited from the ethnic diversity resulting from immigration. The new ideas, skills, and cultural practices brought by new immigrants allow society to grow and thrive. Open borders advocates argue that diversity fuels an environment in which people live and work harmoniously, thus contributing to greater creativity. Now, if we look at open migration cons, so on here, same thing. We have my claim and then my evidence. Human migration causes an increase in crime. Some opponents for open borders argue that open borders lead to an increased crime. According to the data from the U.S. Department of Justice, undocumented immigrants made up 37% total population of federal prisoners as of 2019. In addition, U.S. Border Control officers seized nearly 4.5 million pounds of illegal narcotics at the border crossing and port of entries in 2018. Human migration creates costs for the gaining country. Some opponents of the open borders also argue that immigrants only contribute to economic growth if the taxes that they pay exceed the costs that they create. This happens only if a majority of immigrants attain higher level incomes. Historically, opponents contend many immigrants receive below average incomes, thus creating a net drain on the economy. And you can see that some of the pros and cons clash with each other, which is great for the debate. Human migration hurts the country that people are migrating from. Large-scale immigration from poorer countries into richer countries can create a brain drain in the source country where the educated professionals leave their home country to live elsewhere, depriving their home countries of an educated workforce. For example, in 2010, more Ethiopian doctors were living in Chicago than they were living in Ethiopia itself. I put together some values and criterions for each side that I think would be useful. So, for example, on the affirmative side, justice, equality, equity, progress, human rights, those are all things that I think that you could link in for this resolution. I think justice is going to be a really easy topic because that's kind of the deciding on whether or not it's just. Negative values, justice, equality, equity, self-preservation, and safety. And then for affirmative criterion ideas, I have consequentialism, utilitarianism, cost-benefit analysis, and John Rawls' maximum principle. John Rawls' maximum principle is essentially focusing on the people who need help the most to create a better society. And then negative criterion ideas, I have deontology, which is the means versus the ends, and then, or means justify the ends, cost benefit analysis, cons categorical imperative, and then cons sociational democracy. I need to figure out how to pronounce that word. And I can go over the definitions on any of those and help you work with those if you'd like to use them. Framework or resolutional analysis. So because this topic is very open-ended, it can create opportunities for people to apply frameworks in which will apply to the round. And so it's something that needs to be addressed regardless of whether or not you agree with it. So in a debate, you can choose to agree with their framework or you can argue it. It's up to you. So a framework is a way to view the resolution for evaluating the round. It can narrow the debate to promote clash and help provide a mechanism to determine the winner of the round. The framework is an analysis in which tells us two things. What does the resolution mean, and what is each debater's job to prove in the round? Sorry, guys. Okay, so for your case writing, please spend the extra time that you have prior to debating this topic to write your cases. Right now, you have 4 weeks until the next tournament. Send me your cases. I included my email on here. You guys should already have it. That way I can vet through your cases to help make them more competitive for black snakes, so that you're not the only one looking at them, and I can help find holes. This will allow me to give you feedback on your cases, and we can discuss it. So share your cases also with each other and develop arguments against them. So even if you just pick like 1 or 2 people that you share your case with, you guys can each kind of debate each other's cases, like write down arguments saying like, hey, this is what I would attack your contention 1 with. This is what I would attack your contention 2 with. Here's what I think is wrong with your value and criterion. And even if you choose not to change anything about it, by having somebody review it and kind of argue against it, you can learn how to defend your case better to where you don't have to just do that in round. And it's a way for you to kind of get in more debate mindset than just waiting for your rounds where your opponents are going to argue against it. You have to remember, this is going to be everyone's first tournament on this topic. The more prepared you are going into the tournament, especially where you're not going to have any debate, like you might have a couple of practice debates, but really you're going to have 2 weeks off of school. So you're going to have no debate. And so if you guys are sending each other things so that you can help build each other's cases, it's going to make you more competitive as a team. And this is the teamwork aspect of LD. Like if you guys work together, you as a team can get better and build up your cases, and then you guys can start closing out tournaments, which is the goal. So that's all I have for you. If you have any